Hey there, good people, and welcome back to the DNP podcast. I'm your host, Debo, and I'm ready for what the offseason has in store. Tyreek Hill got cut by the Dolphins this week, so I'll say which three teams I think are the best fit for him. Also, DraftKings released their over-unders on wins for teams next season, so I'll react to those numbers. This pod is available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, so like, rate, subscribe, and all that good stuff so you can stay up to date with each upload. So this week saw the Miami Dolphins make some big cap-saving moves in releasing Bradley Chubb, James Daniels, Nick Westbrook-Akine, and most notably of all, Tyreek Hill, saving the team around $50 million in cap space for the next season. Hill's Dolphins tenure started out like a house on fire with back-to-back 1,700-yard seasons, but inconsistent quarterback play, off-the-field issues, and injuries have meant the best course forward for the two parties is to go their separate ways. And it'll be really interesting to see what the market is for Tyreek Hill going into next season in terms of, what sort of money he gets, what, teams are actually interested in, because obviously free agency, we're a month away from it. And so a lot of these teams will be, making their own roster moves, their own sort of cutting procedures to, get back over the cap and, build on their team for next season, because obviously only the Seahawks are truly happy with how the 2025 season went, considering they're the ones who ended up lifting the Lombardi at the end of it. So with regards to a player in Tyreek Hill who's shown that he obviously was the best receiver or one of the best, obviously that's a very subjective thing, but you can't deny that we were having discussions whether he was going to be the first receiver to break 2,000 yards and win MVP, right? Like that's the wide receiver position is a position that hasn't won the MVP in history, and Tyreek Hill's play on the field was putting him in discussions to potentially win the award. But obviously they're, as I said, inconsistent quarterback play over to a Tagovailoa. He's another one that Miami will potentially be looking to move on from this offseason, off-field issues with, certain cases that he's had out again off the field, and heck, getting arrested the odd time as well on the way to a game even, which is, pretty ridiculous. And I guess, the one that, knowing the game that we cover and watch, the one that'll actually be the biggest impact on his career moving forward is the gruesome injury that he suffered when he last stepped out on the field, and how he recovers from that, especially considering that his main attribute was how fast he could run and the speed and breaking the top off of a defense. Like, you question how will he be able to do that going forward, and will he still have the same burst and same quickness? One thing for Tyreek in his career that he definitely improved on was his route running, because he obviously comes into the league starting out as a special teams guy, and then he refines his route running, refines his ability to obviously run like no one's business at the speed that few can run. He was having questions of whether he could be an Olympic runner. And combining that with the actual ability to hone that in on the field and be, a dynamic receiver with, the ability to run routes as well. And he very much did that and, proved to be a very dominant force in his position for many years in his career. So obviously there is a hope for teams in free agency, and obviously for himself as well, that he'll be able to continue to have, a certain level of impact when he comes back onto the field. And I think there are three teams in particular that, are best placed to get that out of him, and also for him to go to and say, okay, here's a team I can join and, progress my career moving forward, to end on the right note with, a Lombardi in hand. So I'll start off, the three teams and say the first team is the Los Angeles Chargers. And they're obviously an interesting one, considering that Mike McDaniel is now their offensive coordinator, who was the head coach throughout Tyreek's tenure in Miami. So, with those back-to-back 1,700-yard seasons that I mentioned before, that is Mike McDaniel getting the best out of him to potentially be a MVP candidate, and has a very big penchant for drawing up schemes and drawing up the right plays to get the players at his disposal in the right spot. Like, look at how Achan's been able to perform under McDaniel, how Jalen Waddle as well. Like, he is clearly one of the premier play callers in the NFL. The question was for his head coaching credentials, whether he could build a culture that could sustain winning for a long period. And Miami itself is known for being a questionable place to be able to hone that culture. So now that you go to LA, the Chargers, who are coming off 2 back-to-back playoff seasons, who have Justin Herbert, who has a rocket arm and a massive ability to spread the ball all over the field, giving him a weapon like Tyreek Hill could be one to help them get over the top. Because you see with, Lad McConkey had a disappointing 2025. Quentin Johnson was inconsistent, started out really hot, then very much cooled off. Keenan Allen is one who, hasn't, it just isn't at the peak of his career anymore. So, being able to supplant that with a Tyreek Hill to come in could be one to get them over the top in the AFC West, because the competition in that division is, been strong for the past couple of years, especially with Sean Payton at the Broncos, and obviously a disappointing season this year. But the Chiefs with Andy Reid and Mahomes, that they'll never be out of the question, regardless of having the disappointing year they had last year. Another point to make for the Chargers is that Jim Harbaugh has very much been able to make the best of what he's got when he's in a situation. So the fact that you're bringing in Tyreek Hill, who's had issues with organizations and in the past, that he can really put his arm around him, put him in the right position and make him feel good about himself, which I'm sure there were times in Miami where you've got Tua calling him out in press conferences, and him even coming out after games and saying, I don't want to be here anymore. Being in the place like the Chargers, where it's very much, I guess, kumbaya, a bit more lovey-dovey than other organizations, with Harbaugh setting the culture, that's somewhere where he could go to and very much see himself playing at the level that he'd hoped to play at this point in his career. The next team I've got is the Buffalo Bills. This is one where I definitely think the Bills need a player like Tyreek as much as Tyreek needs a place like the Bills, because in their wide receiver room, you need a big, deep threat that I don't think you could say that they got from guys like Gabe Davis or Curtis Samuel. Khalil Shakir is more of a slot guy, not really one who breaks the top off a defense. Brandon Cooks is someone they've had to bring in, who is in a very late stage of his career, and that was even a mid-season move, so you can't even say that is one that they fully I'm gonna say fully thought out, but it's definitely not one where you're expecting great things out of him, or you're investing a lot in him. You're just paying him for the couple weeks you have him in your roster. So making a move like bringing in Tyreek Hill, who obviously is coming off that injury, but is also knows the division as well. That's a big thing that these teams look at in terms of acquiring them. There's a lot of in-division sort of switches that are made, and going from Tua as your quarterback to Josh Allen, who's obviously an MVP, one of, if not the best quarterback in the league, you can't really look at it and say that it would be a bad move for either side, because Tyreek would want to go somewhere where he could compete, which Buffalo is definitely in that win now Super Bowl level mode, and you want from Buffalo's side someone that can has that drive to win. Like you've seen it, they've brought in a Von Miller, they've brought in guys that have won in the past, because Tyreek Hill is obviously a Super Bowl champion with the Chiefs one time, so he's obviously got that hunger to keep going and move forward. And for Tyreek as well, you get to face the Dolphins twice a year, which I'm sure would be a pretty big point that he'd want to make sure that get a little get back. I say get back is you can finish that sentence. Then the last team I've got for Tyreek Hill is the San Francisco 49ers. I think they're a team that very much needs to add to their receiver room, especially considering that Brandon Ayuk went AWOL last year, and that's cap that they'll get back for next season. And Jawan Jennings is going into free agency, so you'll need to either pay him or make a move in that regard. You also got Ricky Pearsall, who obviously has had his injury concerns throughout his whole NFL career, so there's definitely a need from the Niners side to add to their receiver room and make sort of wholesale moves in that position group, especially considering now that you've got Brock Purdy, who his success has been with elite weapons, and now you've got Ayuk gone, Jennings gone, Pearsall a concern, McCaffrey. You thank the heavens that he was able to be healthy for a full year, but it's still not something I believe you can bank on. You've also got Kittle, who did his Achilles in that Philly game, so there's a need to add weapons to the room for San Francisco, and Tyreek's obviously one that could fill that role and be a deep threat, which I'm sure Shanahan would like to have that sort of receiver at his disposal to play with. And I don't think the 49ers are a team that's terribly far off of. Obviously they make the playoffs as a 6 seed, but with 12 wins, they obviously have that game in week 18, which is for the 1 seed. They lose that, they then get the win in Philly, but blown out in Seattle. But with a Fred Warner, with a Nick Bosa, you can see yourself saying, okay, we got unlucky with injuries. We just need to see ourselves as a team that isn't too far off, but bolster the whole roster in general, and we can make a real run at this thing, because we have elite players to come back fully fit for the season to come. So those are the 3 teams, Chargers, Bills, Niners, that I think would be the best teams for Tyreek to go to. I wouldn't really put the Chiefs in this mode, simply because I think their wide receiver room is A-OK. You've got Rashee Rice, you've got Xavier Worthy, you've definitely invested in it. You've got guys that in Juju and in Hollywood Brown that if you want to bring back, you could. It just seems that there isn't that need to kind of go back to your ex in a sense, right? So I think I wouldn't say that's a great move for either side, but I'm sure there are other people who have other opinions, or other teams than the ones I've mentioned that they think Tyreek would work best in. If you say so, put them down in the comments. I'd like to hear from the people who watch and listen to this podcast and say what their minds are, because the best thing is great discussion, right? But yeah, I would say Chargers, Bills, Niners are the best places for Tyreek to go for the 26th season. We're 202 days away from the start of the NFL season, which is a fair time period. But that hasn't stopped DraftKings from releasing their over-under on win totals for every team in the league for the upcoming season. So what I'm going to do in this segment is I've already looked at all 32 of the over-under on the win totals for next season. I've given one team that I think is heavily undervalued with regards to their number, and 2 teams who I think have been well overvalued. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show a graphic that has all 32 teams and their corresponding win totals that you would be able to bet on from DraftKings. As a UK resident, I'm not able to, but I'm sure there are a lot of Americans who have that capability, and to be fair, we have our own sports book, so we can make our own judgments on with regards to the win totals, but at least in this case, DraftKings have put them out to the public. Many haven't as of now, so this is what I'm going to, critique at the minute. So first of all, I'll just go straight into the team that I think is heavily undervalued, and I'll be honest, I don't care if you think this is just a heavily homer pick or just the team I support, because it is a team I support. The Atlanta Falcons having their win totals be 6.5 for the over-under. I think that is, out of this whole 32 bracket, it's the easiest over to hit, because the Falcons have hit the over on this mark 5 of the last 6 years. Like, we have Bijan Robinson, Drake London, AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates, who was second in sacks last year with, in my opinion, an upgrade in the coaching staff. So you're telling me that the rosters, obviously the roster we haven't judged yet, but the most important thing in the NFL is, coaching for sustained team success. And if you're telling me that with poor coaching or bad coaching or, coaching that has led to a team underperformance still has a team hitting your 7s, your 8s in the last 2 years, that with a total of 6.5, that this team is going to basically get 2 games worse at the minimum, I think that's ridiculous. I hope that the team does better. I'm not going to hide the fact that, I am a Falcons fan. I do want the team to make the playoffs finally after 8-season long drought now. But to tell me that the team's going to regress 2 games based on, who the big free agents, I guess Tyler Algiers, someone we're going to lose in the free agency. You'd think that Caden Ellis is one who's a big leader on the defense that we might lose, but that's one that could still return. Kyle Pitts, who I believe is going to get franchise tagged, but even then, I don't think that he's someone that you bank on losing, despite obviously the fact that he's a free agent in the year. It just seems like, to see this team and this roster and to have them tied with the Titans and the Browns for a win total, and have the Saints win total at 7.5, so a team that the Falcons swept are projected to be better. It's one that I just can't really justify, and I think this is an over that if I was betting with DraftKings, which don't have a sponsor, so I'm not exactly promoting you to bet with them, but this is very much an undervalued team, over on the mark that I would for sure hit with as much money as I would be willing to hit with, based on the information and based on, again, this team has hit this number 5 of the 6 years. So to tell me that this team is going to regress heavily because you devalue, I guess, the quarterback position that much, I just don't think. Even with Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke, this team is still hitting 7 wins. So if you're telling me that you're going to bet the under on 6.5, I question your ball knowledge, to be frankly honest. But 2 teams that I do have hitting the under totals as it stands now. The first one would be the Cincinnati Bengals being at 9.5. You mean the Bengals that haven't made the playoffs in 3 years and therefore haven't hit this number in 3 years? They need 10 wins for this over to cash. And with a defense that, as of most recent viewing, and even not that recent viewing, right, with the past 3 years, a defense that has been leaking points has been shocking. Like, they've tried changing the defensive coordinator, and heck, Lou Anarumo went to the Colts and he was doing a fine job with what he had available to him. So Al Golden comes in, you have Shamar Stewart hold out, Trey Hendrickson hold out, but eventually have them come back to the fray, and your defense is still leaking points and dropping games and costing you multiple games despite the light show you have on offense. It's one that I question putting them on the same tier as the Denver Broncos, who are in the AFC Championship game, the New England Patriots that are in the Super Bowl, and the Houston Texans at 9.5 as well, who have been in the playoffs each of those 3 years that the Bengals haven't. To tell me that they're going to, they're hitting the same heights as those three teams I just mentioned, with Trey Hendrickson as a free agent and possibly walking out the door, Cam Taylor-Britt as well, who's their best cornerback. It's just, I very much question having the Bengals be on that level with teams that have been performing at a playoff standard over the past recent years. I don't think the Cincinnati Bengals, even how much ever you value Burrow and Chase and Higgins as a tandem, as a trio, to think that they've had that trio for the past 3 years and they haven't been able to hit the number consistently. So this is an under that I would hit on 9.5. I think 9 and 8 is a very realistic ceiling for a team that has a defense that can't stop a nosebleed, and a coach that's on the hot seat that could easily be out of the door next year. I just don't think the Cincinnati Bengals are as good as the 9.5 win total that they currently are valued at. Another team that I don't think is worth their win total value is the Detroit Lions, getting listed at 10.5, because they're losing Alex Anzalone and DJ Reader. You're sensing that that offense, in terms of the consistent heights they were hitting, was very much due to the fact that they had Ben Johnson at the helm, who was scheming up an offense in Chicago this past season that was very fruitful for them, and obviously gets them the NFC North Championship. To have the Lions off of a disappointing season, back just sorting them right back in the highest tier of team in the league, because the highest win total any team got given out was 10.5. So you're saying the Lions are up there with a Bills team that have, Josh Allen. I wouldn't say Jared Goff and Josh Allen are, level in the same playing field, or even, the way the Lions offense was performing over the course of the season, with the inconsistency that Drew Petzing, as the new offensive coordinator that they've brought over from the Cardinals, will be able to have that talent humming at the highest of cylinders, right? And especially when you look at the fact that they're also on the same level as the two NFC Championship teams, the Rams and the Seahawks, also being listed at 10.5 wins. To say that, missing the playoffs, you're going to, hit 11 wins, with still being in the NFC North, which is in itself a tough schedule. I just don't think that the Detroit Lions are one of the upper tier teams in the NFL based on what I saw last season. And it's very much a question of their offensive line as well, and whether the losses of Ragnow and the big players that they've got on that line, to say that they're going to maintain the levels that they hit in their 15-1 2024 season, or 2023 making the championship game. It's just one where I very much question whether they can say that this year was a blip and we can just ride back into where we were initially. So it'll be interesting to see whether that can happen. You're obviously a fair ways away from it, but as I sit now, pre-free agency, pre-draft, I don't think the Lions can exactly be considered in the top tier of teams in the NFL. And that was episode 28 of the DNP podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for coming along to the show. What do you think? Which team should Tyreek Hill join for the 26th season? Am I right? Is the Chargers, Niners, Bills the teams that he should join, or do you have a wild card that you think Tyreek could be a better fit for? Also, when I showed you the DraftKings numbers, was I right? Falcons, are they just going to be one of the bottom feeders looking at a new quarterback in the 27 draft class? The Bengals are much underrated in my view, Lions as well, or any other team. What do you think the DraftKings was thinking or smoking or whatever you thought they were doing when making those win totals. Let me know down in the comments, and like, rate, subscribe, and all that good stuff for the podcast. It helps me out a lot. And have a good one. Bye bye.